So today on the Cooldown, let's talk about the pros and cons of training solo, which you do a lot and have really pretty much your entire career. Running's at one level a solo effort, but there's lots of ways of working with other people and doing it in teams. So let's talk about that a little bit. Um, so you've as I just said, you've sort of had this balance where you've done a ton of training by yourself, whether it's in keto or various places around the world. You've also trained with partners like Jim Walmsley, Chris Fisher, and your friend Connor, who was a special guest, in fact, on this show just a couple of weeks
That's right.
back. And this week we saw you sharing some time and miles with Ryan Hall, famous distance runner. Let's start with the basics. So, do you prefer one to the other, training alone with a partner or with a group? And how do you pick a training partner?
I'm gonna kind of cop out of the answer and say like there's a time and a place for both. I think that being, for me personally, I think I benefit a lot from a pretty hefty amount of solo training time, probably more than most people would do, because I think the way my brain works and my training works is I have figured out over many years what works well for me, and it's not necessarily what works well for everybody. So part of that is literally just it's hard to find people who want to do the training that I want to do.
Hmm.
That said, I love running with other people and training with other people. Whether that's, the big groups that I have training camps with Chosky and our coaches there and other athletes, or like, the people who you mentioned, like Jim and Chris and Connor, all those people who I've shared a lot of miles with. I think there's tremendous value in that, both on like a day in, day out, as well as even if, for me, even if it's, once a week or twice a week or something, having a run where I do it with another person, to me, that is tremendously valuable just for the sake of camaraderie and conversation and all those things. I think it's really, really fun. It just makes training more fun. And when you're training
Uh-huh.
super hard, doing little things to make training fun is great. So I think that's really important. In terms of how to pick a training partner, I heard this aphorism recently that the way that you can tell if a mentor-mentee relationship is a really positive one is if both people think they're getting the best end of the deal. If the mentor thinks they're getting more from the mentee, and if the mentee thinks they're getting the most
Right.
from the mentor. And
Right.
that's kind of how I think about picking training partners. I have always gravitated to people who are better than me at the thing that I want to do. So Jim Wamsley is a great example. I started training with Jim. He was much more accomplished than me, much farther along in his career,
Yep.
and he had all these skills as a mountain and trail runner that I was really interested in.
Hmm.
And I hope that that was one of those relationships where it's like, okay, I can add a lot and to him and his training and push him a little bit, and hopefully he can, pull me along and teach me a lot as well. Um, so I think the best relationships are like that in training. And I think Chris is another really good example where he comes to the table with way more technical skills than me, way more, he's a skier, so much, much more alpine, snow, mountain travel experience than me. And, I come probably to the table with a little bit more just general aerobic training and knowledge and experience and that kind of thing. So I think that's part of why we've made a really good pair. So I think the best kind of training relationship is going to be one where both people feel like the other one has something to teach them, you know? And for me, that's always looking to people who are better at me or better at something than I am.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hmm.
And then also like obviously you just like want to get along with the person. Like I think
Yeah.
that's part of why like Jim, Chris, and
Well,
Connor, like the three people you mentioned, it's like all those people I just really enjoy spending time with, whether we're just like hanging out and getting
right.
pizza or we're training something super hard. It doesn't matter. I just enjoy spending time with those people.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's generally true, I would say, in life. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but um, there's a time and a place. If you want to get something done that's challenging and complex, you're going to need some time alone to work on it, even if it's a team effort. And you're going to need some dedicated time to think what Cal Newport calls deep work. It's hard to do
Hmm.
deep work when you're chattering with a lot of friends. On the other hand,
Yeah,
the chattering and the working, whether it's physical or mental, is important, not just because you get a diversity of ideas and collaboration, but it's also, as you said, it's a social connection. It's finding people you enjoy doing things with and working with really helps a lot just with life in general. So
absolutely.
definitely we exhort you all to make sure you make connections and if you can do it in the context of your training, even better. But remember, there are some things you need to do as a solitary effort. So let's turn to that and talk about, you've spent so many hours running up and down Polochowski. You can tell us exactly how many times that so what are the mental and physical benefits that you find in solo training that might be more difficult if you were running with a partner or in a group?
I think the most important thing is recognizing what what kind of sport you're competing in and whether you're going to be competing alone or in a big group of people, you know? You see a lot of success with big group training, for example, in Kenya and Ethiopia. They're often like 200 guys that train together. That said, they usually run in a group of 10 or 20 people at the front of the race for a lot of the race when you run a road marathon. So it kind of simulates what you're doing in the race. Now, on the other hand, if you're running an ultra marathon or like a FKT, like the Everest project, you're basically going to be out there by yourself for a long time. Maybe in an ultra marathon, you'll have some company for some amount of time, but most ultras are pretty long and pretty spread out. You end up doing a lot of running by yourself. And so I think there is value both mentally and physically to learning how to be alone in your discomfort and just being able to be in your own head. There's a lot of time to be in your own head in a 24-hour race. That's a lot of time to be in your own head. And yeah, you'll come through aid stations and you'll have other people that you run with for part of the race maybe, but at the end of the day, you're going to be running a lot of it by yourself. And so you have to be really good mentally and physically, both at just the idea of literally being present and mindful and all these things that we talked about from a kind of mindfulness perspective, literally, as well as physically. Okay, I need to be able to monitor my own pace. I need to be able to make sure I'm tracking my fueling. I need to make sure that I know where I'm going, literally on the course. I'm not getting lost. All these things that are really important to do by yourself. So I think there is a really important value, like you said in just a second ago, of having those days where you're just going out and grinding by yourself, because honestly, again, unless you're in an elite marathon or something like that, you're probably going to end up being by yourself for a lot of a race.
Uh-huh. That's a good point. So simulating the actual environment and conditions you're going to experience. In fact, kind of what you were doing, what we were talking about earlier in the episode on Cotopaxi. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. And so now on the other side, so what are the benefits that you've seen in training in groups or training with partners?
So I'll speak both from my own experience and a little bit of observing others. In my own experience, I think there's two really big benefits to training with other people for me. One is the kind of like chit chat, conversation, camaraderie, just making training more fun. That
Hmm.
is a huge part of it, honestly. Especially, you're just going out for your easy days, or even if it's a really long single session that maybe you're taking it a little bit slow. For example, in earlier in this episode, we talked about that big day in Cotopaxi, and I had the pleasure of having Ryan Hall, who was like my, idol on my wall in my dorm room growing up. And he was there for the first lap there, first couple hours with me. And that was fantastic because we were able to chat and catch up and just had some amazing conversations in, the middle of the night going up and down this giant mountain. And it just sets the mood really well. It keeps things light, it keeps things calm. But it is, I think, limited to those days where you're not necessarily pushing tremendously hard. That falls into category two. So category two is actually pushing each other in training when it's really hard. And I think there's also a lot of value in that. I've had so many workouts, whether it's chasing Jim Walmsley around or some of the track runners that I used to train with here in Quito when I was more of a road runner, where guys who are objectively faster than me on the track, who having, it's like a greyhound, right, in a race or a horse race or something, having that body in front of you to just lock onto like the Terminator. I am 100% convinced that I've been able to accomplish things in training and racing that I absolutely would not have been able to do if I were there by myself. It was because I was chasing someone else down. And that is hugely beneficial because if you do that every week, say, like let's say you do your track workouts once a week and you do those with other people and you're working out with someone who's a little bit faster than you and they're dragging you along every week you're getting a little bit faster and you're doing things that you wouldn't normally be doing. That adds up a lot. So I think there's a really, really big benefit. And that's where I think when we look broadly at, especially in track and field, I think it's less so in ultra marathoning and mountain stuff, which again, I think goes to the fact that those are more solitary races. But if you look at the best in the world at track and field marathon, none of those guys train by themselves. Every single one of them has people helping them out in workouts, whether it's these groups in, in E10 Kenya or Bakoji Ethiopia, where they literally have 100 guys on the track, all running in a line and just towing each other along. Or it's something like, the Ingebrigtsen brothers are really famous track and field athletes from Norway. He's the best track 1500 3K runner in the world. And he'll literally have his brother like on a bicycle, like right in front of him setting the pace. And so it's this idea of having that camaraderie, but also having literal help and having that person to chase can be so, so valuable. So I think
Yep.
there's a huge value in that from a competitive perspective as well as from a kind of camaraderie perspective.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So now let's talk specifically then about running up Everest, which will be a big solo effort. And as we've said many times on this podcast, certainly over the last couple of podcasts, very, very high, extremely high, the highest mountain in the world. Are there specific things that you want to work on during solo training? Are there things that will be helpful specifically for Everest versus general FKTs, which are, as you said, solitary events for the most part?
I try to simulate as much as I can what I expect my competition day will be like. So for Everest, we talked about it earlier in this episode. You know, this is part of why I just did this run on Cotopaxi. It's going to probably be dark. It's going to be cold.
Right.
And I'm mostly going to be by myself. But even actually, I wasn't even thinking about this, but the way that we did it with Ryan coming with me for the first lap is actually probably a pretty good simulation because Chris will start with me. So having that ability to keep it light, keep it fun for the beginning, and then transitioning into, okay, now it's kind of time to go to work and I'm going to be by myself. I'm going to be by myself for a very long time in my head, in my body, on this place that is extremely inhospitable. That's, I think it's almost like a callousing of the mind. And that only happens from doing it every day, day after day. And so that's what these, almost 100 laps or whatever at the Polichowski is. That's what it's all about is it's just, okay, going there and putting your head down and just getting to work and knowing that you can do that and you can do it for a really long time. That to me is the most powerful thing. Is it's really about training the mind when you're out on those really long days by yourself, especially the hard days. That's, you gain so much confidence from that. And like we talked about before, I think so much of really big mountain climbing is above the shoulders. It's in the head. And if you can keep your head in the right place and you're really fit, that's all you need to do. So the fitness I know how to take care of, and the head, that's really the what we're trying to do out there, like with all these big many hours a week doing stuff by yourself. It's, you just
Mm-hmm.
got to do it.
Okay. All right. So in our public service effort, based on your experience doing this at an elite level, also your experience as a coach, do you have any advice you give to recreational runners about balancing solo training versus group training in their programs?
Almost always the first piece of advice I give to a new runner is find a running buddy or find a running club. I think a lot of people, if they hear about what I do, a lot of people ask, "Oh, what's your number one tip if I want to get into running?" And that's always it: is find someone else to do it with because you're just so much more likely to keep doing an activity that is fun. And
Yep.
when we're social beings, we're monkeys at the end of the day, right? Like we like being with other people, and if we have a way to make something that is objectively not that comfortable more fun, you're more likely to do it. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always my number one advice is, okay, if you're, especially if you're a beginner, or you just struggle with consistency or you want to get into it, find a running buddy, find a club. It's going to be more fun. And then you also have this added bonus of accountability, right? Where if I say, hey, Mr. C, let's meet to run every Thursday morning at 7 a.m., if it's 6 o'clock in the morning and my alarm goes off, if I'm just going to run by myself, I might say, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to do it. It's raining. But if, oh, Mr. C is waiting for me on the corner, like I better be there. That's a really strong accountability uh, way to control yourself. So
Yep.
I think that's really, really positive. I see almost no downside there. Realistically, like almost all people, you're never going to be able to run with someone every single day. So I think you'll get plenty of that solo training regardless. I think
Mm-hmm.
what's more important is that you go out and actively find a way to be running, exercising, whatever it is you're doing with someone else. Anything that is a little bit hard, if you're doing it with someone else, it will be easier.
Yep.
I guarantee that. So go find a running buddy, find a running club, even better, and then set like a recurring date, like I said, like every Thursday morning or whatever it is, but something that both of you guys can stick to. And yeah, it's a great way to develop friendships. It's a great way to make the most of your training and just have more fun with it.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Excellent points. Thanks for helping out everybody who's out there. Okay. That was all I had to say. You want to add anything else on this?
No, I think we're good. I think that big takeaway is, yeah, training with other people is amazing. It's fantastic. It'll make you a better runner. And,
Mm-hmm.
also, especially if you're training for something where you're going to have to be solo, you better do a little bit of solo training there too, at least. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a mixed bag, but I think
Mm-hmm.
the most important one is making sure you have at least some days where you're training with others for sure.
Special guest arriving late. Thea the
Speaking
cat.
of speaking of having other people, or I guess other animals, that helps. There's
Yeah.
we got Mr. C's cat making a podcast guest appearance, Theodosia. I think this is her
Okay.
second podcast appearance.
Yeah, maybe. All right. You want to read us out
Uh,
then?
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. Please send any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@chosky.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can read my raw training logs. This is a multimedia project at tylercandrews.com or via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Ty's Training is a Chosky media production and brought to you by Chosky Endurance Collective, the world's leader in online coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll talk to you next week. Ciao.